Thank you all for being here. This is live in person and on Zoom, and so we do have people who are coming in, and they're let in at the top of the hour. So instead of having them wait in a waiting room, we'll let them in, and I'll get started. So thank you all for being here. Welcome to the Vashon Heritage Museum talk for the month of May. And as I just said, we're starting something new this evening by offering our talks in person and on Zoom. I'm Elsa Kroonquist, the Executive Director of the Heritage Museum, and Chris Austin, our co-producer on this series of talks, and a member of our museum board. He will be managing the Zoom chat this evening. Thank you, Chris. On behalf of the Heritage Museum Board, welcome to tonight's talk on the Spirit of Place, presented by Michael Meade. I'd like to recognize and thank For Culture for sponsoring our museum talk series, and many thanks to the Vashon Mori Land Trust for welcoming us and allowing us the use of this beautiful hall. I'd also like to invite everyone to the museum for the month of May to tour our exhibit on the Vashon potters of the 70s and 80s. And in June, please support the museum by joining us for our auction fundraiser. As is our custom, we start all of our museum meetings with a recognition and honor of the Shuwabapsh Native people. We acknowledge and recognize that we are on the ancestral lands and traditional home of the Shuwabapsh Coast Salish Native people, the first people of Vashon Island. This land was their home long before Euro-American voyagers and settlers came, and they were forcibly removed from these lands and relocated onto neighboring reservations, including Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin Island, and Muckleshoot. Vashon Island is their traditional home, and their historical relationship with the land continues today. We honor the island itself and the Shuwabapsh people, past and present. Tonight's presentation is The Spirit of Place, presented by Michael Meade. Michael Meade is a renowned storyteller, author, and scholar of mythology, anthropology, and psychology. He combines hypnotic storytelling, street-savvy perceptiveness, and spellbinding interpretations of ancient myths with a deep knowledge of cross-cultural rituals. He has an unusual ability to distill and synthesize these disciplines, tapping into ancestral sources of wisdom and connecting them to the stories we are living today. He is the founder of the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, a nonprofit network of artists, activists, and community builders that encourages greater understanding between diverse peoples. He is the author of Awakening the Soul, The Genius Myth, Fate and Destiny, The Two Agreements of the Soul, Why the World Doesn't End, and several other books. And he is also the creator of the Living Myth podcast. Please welcome Michael Meade as he tells us about the creation myth, about earth, healing, and community. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone online. Thanks for being interested. So what I want to do is tell a creation myth with the idea, background idea of spirit of place, and the other background idea, which is that when we find ourselves in the dark times, that is to say, when trouble is coming, when nature is rattling, culture is unraveling, when people are polarized and divided, no one can figure out what to do, that dark time is aligned with the time right before creation. So that makes me have to say, creation is not something simply that happened back then and we've been in the aftermath simply. Creation is ongoing all the time. Think of a forest that grows up, and then the very trees that grow up fall down, they rot back into the soil and produce more trees. That's the nature of the world that we live in. Human nature, despite recent Western education, human nature is connected to great nature. The division between culture and nature is somewhat false and certainly exaggerated over the past couple of hundred years. And so another value of creation myths, it brings everyone back to the beginning. And the beginning is the place where all possibilities and all potentials were present. And so at the end of an era, what tries to happen mythologically is a return to creation times, is a recreation. Creation myths are also recreation myths. So that's some of the background. And then in terms of the tonight, and I'm just repeating something that Elsa said, we're in the Land Trust building, which is on one side of the street going through the center of Vashon town. And on the other side of the street is the Heritage Museum. And so one way to understand that is those are the two big stories in the world. The story of the earth and nature and the world going on, and the story of human beings in the midst of that other big drama. Am I making sense? These are the two big stories. And they're interrelated just as human nature is connected to great nature, and they have an effect on each other. And if anybody was doubting that, check out the effect that humans have had on climate crisis. And then you can also say, well, if we could do that much damage in a couple of hundred years, it's possible that we could help the healing of that in a period of time if we understood how nature heals. Am I making sense? I'm always checking with the audience because, I'm not sure. I mean, if I'm not making sense, we could try to clarify or at least, I don't know, come up with a new story. Anyway, it's a habit of mine. All right, so two big stories, and in this interesting thing, we're hosted by the Land Trust, which suggests the idea of, what do they call it, shepherding the land. But it also suggests to me trusting the land. In other words, one of the things that has happened is people have lost the connection to the earth. By the way, the word land is not quite accurate. Land is a naval term, and it means to land. You land on the earth. And so we've lost trust in the earth. We've lost the imaginative connection, understanding that the earth is our home on many levels, and you'll see that come up in the creation story. And then on the other side of the street here, the Heritage Museum, heritage is a word that comes from the same root as inheritance. And so the heritage would be that which is inherited, but to me, it's also a dynamic phrase which means legacy. In other words, you inherit, and then what you do with the inheritance is the legacy that you leave. And so heritage is a living thing, not an encapsulated thing. Land trust is a living thing, not a settled thing. And so to me, it's interesting that you can walk down the street and be on either side the two big stories and the two references to legacy, human legacy, earth legacy. And in the modern world, I think we're being asked to weave those back together. All right, so that's something else about myth. The idea is not to try to understand a story. Really, that's insulting to the story. Stories, especially myths, are vehicles of mystery. And so if they're understood, they're kind of defeated. So the idea isn't to understand the story. The idea is to stand in the story. And so what I mean by that is a story is its own territory. It's an imaginal territory. And the idea is to let ourselves get pulled into that territory that's being made by the story, which, by the way, is a series of metaphors and symbols, which then give everyone who participates a metaphorically shared language, which is what's lacking on a daily basis, politically, economically, and otherwise. Am I making sense? In other words, people in the common contemporary world think they're not in the same story. We're in the process now of getting a real division of states based on understanding of law, and it could get very serious with people literally living in different stories. if everybody went back to a creation story, you begin to pick up shared metaphors, and then the issue isn't that you're not in the story, you're in a different part of the story, and suddenly people don't have to agree on everything. They can talk across the territory of story. That's how story has always been used. So then my way of thinking of it is let the story come and touch you. I think of it as mythological acupuncture. A story will stick you exactly where you need to get stuck. And so you just trust that. So I'll tell the story. I'm not doing it in the full-blown way of telling stories. It's going to be a little bit more casual. So just listen and then see what grabs you in the story, because then afterwards we'll look into the story to see what the areas might mean and how it can apply universally, but also how it can apply locally and personally. All right? So the story in this case, I should explain that. So I don't plan, schedule, and strategically decide to tell stories. Someone invites me, as like say Heritage Association does, a Heritage Museum does, and then a story might come to mind right away, or it might take a while, or I might be walking into the room and the story will announce itself. That's the story I tell. In other words, it's not predetermined. In this case, the story came very quickly because the title was Spirit of Place, and so the story starts with that idea of finding Spirit of Place. But I just wanted to explain that the story, it arrives because of the attention that's happening once people say they're getting together. That's the way it works for me. So in this case, the story comes from the White Mountain Apache. That's a tribe on the eastern Arizona. And this is one of their creation stories. And so stories, there is no one version of a story. So the idea of telling the right version is a misnomer. The word version means, one of more than one. And so there are many versions, and even like the Christian Bible has 2 creation stories in it. That's typical. Creation is so manifold that you wouldn't want to have one story. So this story has more than one name, but one of the names for the story is How Healing Ceremonies Began. And so it starts like this. In the beginning, it was all just darkness. There was nothing to be seen, not even the sun or the moon or the stars. It was just an expanse of darkness that could be seen as an endless ocean of darkness, or it could have been just perpetual night. At any rate, there was nothing but darkness at the beginning. And then the one who made the earth separated the sky from the earth. And then things began to appear, those things that had been hidden in that primordial darkness before the separation began. And once the separation started and things began to appear, the one who made the earth brought in the mountains and the forest and the rivers and the lakes, and then the birds came and all the animals came. And then after all that had happened and everything was prepared, then it was time for people, for the first people to come. And the one who made the earth made and gathered the energy that makes people, and then put those first people on the earth. And then the first people were living on the earth, on the land, as people say now. And then it turned out that the first people were not comfortable. And so they were saying to each other, I don't like this place. We should be in a better place. As a matter of fact, we should be in a place where we could sleep well and rest well. And then someone else said, yeah, and where we could have big dreams. And because it was back at the beginning, the one who made the earth could hear what they were saying and also could speak to them. And so the one who made the earth said, if you're not happy where you are, gather yourselves up and move around and find a better place. And so the first people began to wander and travel. And to tell you the truth, people have been wandering the earth ever since. And eventually, after stopping here and stopping there, those first people settled in a particular place, and they noticed they were starting to rest and sleep well, and they noticed they were starting to have big dreams, and so then they dwelt there, and that became their place, and they lived there in a good way, and you could say everything was going well. But you know how it is on the earth. It can only go well for a certain amount of time. Eventually trouble's going to come in. That's the way it is on this earth. And so sure enough, after a while, some of those first people began to fall ill. And because it was back at the beginning, no one even knew what sickness was. So no one did anything about it, except some people turned away from it and wouldn't go near those people who were ill. And other people just tried to help but didn't know what to do. And slowly the people who were ill were fading and they were losing the vitality of their life. And no one knew what to do. No one knew about healing because no one even knew what sickness was. And then it happened that 4 of those first people, and no one knows exactly why, decided to go out in the evening when the light was disappearing and the darkness was falling back over the earth. And once they were out there, they each began to face into a different direction, looking directly into the darkness. We don't know why, but as they were looking into the darkness, the one who made the earth spoke directly to them and said, you know, on this earth, for every sickness, there's a cure. For every illness, there's an antidote. For every trouble, there's a solution. And then those first people, at least those 4 of the first people, had knowledge. And they had knowledge of healing as well. And so then they went back into the village thinking about what they had heard from the one who made the earth, who spoke directly to them. And they decided every night they would go out and they would stand in the darkness and look into the unknown darkness and see what happens. And so they went out each night. And then eventually the one who made the earth spoke to one of them and gave that person knowledge and gave them a song. And then another night, it happened for another of those people until all of the first 4 people had been given specific knowledge and had songs. And then the next time they went out, the one who made the earth spoke to them and said, listen, now that you have knowledge, now that you have songs, you have to go back into the village and bring those people who are sick and put them in the middle of the village and bring everyone else around them. And once you have everyone there, then you use the knowledge that you've been given. You sing the songs that you have learned and tell them the story about creation at the very beginning and put hands on them and bring everyone together. And so those 4 people went back into the village and they brought the ones who were ill and they brought them to the center, and then they gathered everyone. And then they began to tell the story of creation. And while they were doing that, they began to bring each of them bringing in the songs they had learned. And then each brought in the medicine they had gathered from the knowledge given to them by the one who made the earth. And in the course of that, energy began to gather and move. And you may say, God, I hope those ones who were ill became healed. And apparently it did happen, but something else happened. The people who were just part of it, who were paying attention, who were in touch with each other, all began to get some healing out of it. And pretty soon everyone had learned something new and everyone felt more vital and had more healing. And the ancient people say that was the beginning of healing ceremonies, and any healing that is happening in the world now has come from that. At least that's what the elders saying. And me, I'm sticking with these old stories and whatever might have come down from the elders, because most of the stories in this world right now are fatalistic and afraid to face the future. So that's the little story. Beautiful, isn't it? And full of surprises. And one way you can tell it's a very old story is the one who made the earth. There's not a name. It's not gendered. It's the one who made the earth. And so that tells you something about irrationality in stories usually means it's ancient. And so, all right, so then I was saying one way to work with the story is to imagine or realize where you are in the story based on what touched you. So I want to just stop for a moment for everyone here, but also those online. Close your eyes if it makes sense, and imagine which part of the story or feel which part of the story struck you the most. In the story, the one who made the earth is delivering knowledge directly to the people. And a story, a real story, a myth, delivers knowledge directly to the people. And so if we can find ourselves in the story, we are like those 4. We are in the alignment to receive knowledge from a story. So just try that for a minute, just so. I should say another thing about myths and stories, they're psychoactive. So what strikes you now could come back in a dream tonight or 4 nights from now. It moves into the psyche. They're real things. They're psychoactive, especially the myths. So then what I want to do is just go through the story with more of an interpretive lens, and then we can talk about the story, or maybe there'll be questions. A story's not over until it's been talked about. That's a legitimate thing, especially a story that makes community, as this story does. So in terms of looking at the story, as I mentioned at the beginning, a creation story is also a recreation story. So this story would be told whenever people were sick or divided or feeling confused or in the darkness. The story would be brought out to say, remember, this is us. This is our ancestors. This is the first people. We come from there. We come from an inherent connection to the divine voice trying to give us information right now. And so that would be important about the beginning of the story. And then the permission given when the one who made the earth saying, if you're not happy where you are, try going somewhere else. We're here on Vashon Island, and I would take the risk to say everyone in the room here and most people that you'll meet going down the street have come here from somewhere else. Hardly anyone here was originally here. And on one hand, that's a problem. Something has been lost. There's been a dissociation from the native people that were mentioned in the beginning. On the other hand, according to this story, people have been wandering the world since the very beginning. You can look at it both ways. Next thing that happens that seems really significant in the story is the people can't settle until they find a real dwelling place. And the markers of a real home are you can rest well, you can dwell, which means different than moving in. Dwell means deep like a well. You can dwell, you can connect to the land or the earth, if you want to call it, whatever. And one of the ways to know you've found the right place is you're having big dreams. Everyone dreams. Even the people who say they don't dream are dreaming, they're just forgetting it. Science has now caught up with mythology and said that if you don't dream, you'll die. And the reason is, scientifically, that means you're not getting deep sleep, deep REM sleep and all, and your body will, and your nervous system will kind of disintegrate. But all the ancient people said, if you're not dreaming, you're not alive. And so now those two agree, the ancient mythological understanding and the modern scientific understanding. We are, you could say, another old idea is a person is a dream with a body wrapped around it. That we are a unique expression of creation. We are here to express that which was given to us before we were born, and some people call it the core imagination. Another name for it is the dream inside the person. I should mention also, since this is a North American native story, throughout North America, native tribes imagine that everyone born is born with medicine inside. And the struggles in life are not to defeat us, but to break down what the modern people call the ego in order that the inner medicine might come out. And so in the times when healing is needed, you could imagine that the healing is going to come from many, many people, because many things need healing, all layers of nature and most aspects of culture. So dreaming is essential, and it's a way to understand, am I dwelling well wherever I am? Am I having big dreams? You know, little dreams can be leftover nervous energy or whatever. A big dream is a revelation to some degree of who I am, or revelation of how I'm aimed. And so big dreams, I've worked with native people up here in the Northwest, and dream is the big language. You want to get attention with indigenous people, talk dreams, because they're all connected to dream time. And maybe you could say one of the problems in the modern world is a disconnection from the dream world, and therefore you wind up in nightmare scenarios. So that's a big part of the story. Next important part of the story, in a way, or area or territory, is when it turns out there's something wrong. Even after the dwelling has been found, the good place to live, now something is wrong. This is true throughout the world. There is no place that isn't in trouble. All of the creation stories will have trouble in them. As a matter of fact, if you have a story with no trouble in it, no one wants to hear it. You say they were really cute children and they were fed really well and they ran around and they never fell down and they were so cute, and then they grew and they were still cute. People are going, okay, can we switch the channel? Can we get some tragedy going so we can feel human? You know, stories are about the beauty and the healing, but look at the story. Healing doesn't come in until sickness is there. So anybody who's a healer is really voting for sickness. I always tell that to all healer friends I have. I know which side you're on, because if there wasn't sickness, you wouldn't have a job. It's a joke, but understand how it's connected. So anyway, there's the trouble in this case comes in as a mysterious illness. So stories are ancient and immediate at the same time. So right now, this story applies to COVID. COVID is still a mysterious illness that people don't know how to describe or what to do about it. And that's one of the layers of extreme trouble that the world is in now. Climate crisis, top layer, affects everyone in the world. COVID affects everyone in the world at the human level. And then you can go from there to injustice, and you can go to all the issues of misogyny, all the issues of disparity throughout the world, and then you can go down to the cascade of trouble that comes from the loss of truth, the lack of truth and meaning. Humans, just like these humans, the first ones in the story, what did they get when they went looking? They got knowledge, real knowledge, truth, living truth. When people say we're in a post-truth world, that's a real problem. I've mentioned one other thing because we're in land trust. Truth and tree are two words that come from the same root. And that tells you, first of all, truth has to be deep-rooted. It can't be abstract. But it tells you something else. A tree is constantly changing. That means the truth is on the move. That means the truth is not settled law. Anyway, just talking story. All right, so then the trouble came from the sickness. That's another big area in the story. And then to me, what I love about the story and why the story keeps coming back to me is those 4 people who go out and stand in the dark. The story doesn't say it was 3 guys and a woman. It's 4 people, and 4 is symbolic, not arithmetic. And it just says some of those first people had the instinct and the intuition to feel and act as if they could possibly learn something to contribute. And so one way to think about it is each of us has a part of us that's those 4 people. Each of us has a calling. That's a calling. You know, some people say, I'm not going near the sick people. Other people say, how can I help? And so that's a calling. It represents calling. And so they go out, and that's a dramatic change in the story. Back in the village, you have people who are sick, and you have people who are busy, and you have people who are in denial, and you have people who are turning away from all the troubles, and those 4 go looking for trouble, and they look in the darkness, and that's a hint about what we're supposed to be doing now. The world now has changed so dramatically that there is no strategic plan. Try it. Make a strategic plan. They had a head count of how many people were coming to sit in the room tonight until people started canceling, because you can't make a plan now. Everything's upside down. The old idea is that the canoe tipped over. Yeah, everybody's in the dark water again. And so then the story says, don't be afraid of that. Don't imagine darkness is empty. Darkness is where creation came from. That's what it said at the beginning of the story. And in the story it says, if you can stand in the darkness, if you can find the courage for that, if you can find the patience for that, knowledge will come directly from the dark. Because whatever started, the one who made the earth is still close by, according to all the stories. I'm sticking with the old stories. All right, so then those 4 get knowledge, and I just want to point out, healing and knowledge come into the world at the same time. That is to say, if it claims to be knowledge, but it's not healing, it may not be knowledge. real knowledge is healing. Real knowledge doesn't ultimately divide, it ultimately connects. So there's just a wonder in that whole scene for me. And then also there is music came in at the same time as healing and knowledge. I mean, thank goodness. I know a lot of musicians, and when the opportunity is there, I'll say, music is the healing road. And most will go, what? I said, music is the healing road. That's what it is. It's always meant to be that. And in terms of Heritage Museum, the word museum means house of the muses. So that means that when you have a museum, it's not supposed to be silent. That's a misunderstanding. They confuse that with some kind of church. There should be music. The muses are like the one who made the world. The muses are unseen beings who are delivering valuable, rhythmic, tonal stuff to people all the time. Museum comes from music, from muses. Music comes from music, and amusing comes from muses. And so when people aren't laughing and having a good time, it means they're dissociated from the muses. I'm just talking story. All right, so all that stuff happened when they were willing to face the dark, and the suggestion of the story is that's where we should be looking now. That which we don't know has to be in the dark beyond what we do know. And so the story is just teaching directly about knowledge and the necessity to accept not knowing when that time comes. So then after the knowledge comes in, then eventually they go back and they follow the directions from the one who made the earth, and they bring everybody together. And so they use the vehicle of those who are ill to create community. Look at the idea of it. It is so profound that, in other words, you don't make community by getting people who agree completely and who are okay. Real community is made by gathering those who are hurting the most and making them the center. The word community comes from the Latin communitas, and it doesn't mean to live near each other. It means to do something so deep that it pulls everybody together no matter what they believe. And so then the story is also saying that which is ill, that which is wrong. Remember the beginning, the one who made the earth said, for every illness there's a cure, for every sickness there's an antidote, for every problem there's a solution. That is the definition of the earth according to this story. And then the story ends by proving that, saying that that which is driving people apart, that which is taking people's vital energy away, is the sign for healing, the sign for bringing everyone together. And I just find that really beautiful. And over time, I've been lucky enough to experiment with community healing. And when that is happening and someone's hurting and you bring all the energy to them, everyone bringing the energy to them is receiving energy from that process, and everyone leaves feeling more healed. That by aiming it towards someone or some situation, actually everybody gets aligned with their own healing. So that's another key part of the story. And so I'll stop there in the kind of tour of the story. And of course, there's all kinds of smaller places in there. And the idea is to realize what struck you, because then it can be applied to the personal life and it can be applied to the local community. So I'm curious, anyone want to say what struck you? If we had to come and find you in the story, where would you be? Anyway, there's no right and wrong in a story, just right and left.
For me, what is the moment of the people looking into the darkness to reconnect to their sense of origin, but it's that staring into nothingness.
If what?
Staring into nothingness or darkness. It's the darkness. It's the beauty of the darkness that struck me, because it feels as a place of origin.
It feels?
As a place of origin.
Yeah. So she was saying that staring into the nothingness, staring into the darkness struck her as a beautiful thing, because it's like staring into origins. the stories, all the stories of creation have the same beginning. In the beginning, it wasn't nothing, it was darkness. So you wind up in a modern Western culture where the most elevated thing is light, bright, and white, and something got lost. And what got lost is the darkness. And people got to find that again. You know, there's a real dissociation and breakdown of imagination that has happened. The word chemistry, the first part of that chem, is an Egyptian word which means blackness or dark earth, because they saw the darkness as the earth. And all chemical ideas, alchemy, and all chemistry actually comes from darkness. It's close by, and people have to gather it again. In ancient Greek, the word for wisdom was dark knowledge. If you just have light knowledge, you only got one half of the story. A wise person knows the dark and the light and knows how to unite them. And living now, we have to get wise again in that way. So thank you for that, honoring the darkness. And the story is saying, if people don't understand blackness and darkness, they don't know where the message is coming from. Right? There's a great old story where Nasruddin, this trickster character in the Middle East, is out at night in a little village, and it's back in the day, and he's under like a gas lamp. And it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and no one's around, you know how it is in a small town. And he's down on the ground looking for something, and his friend comes along and says, Mullah, what's happened? Did you lose something? He said, yeah, I lost, my gold ring, the most valuable thing I have, I've lost it. And he says, oh, let me help you. And so they're both down there under the lamp looking for it. And finally the friend says, are you sure you dropped it here? And he said, no, I dropped it over there in the darkness, but the light is here. People are looking in the light for what can only be found in the dark. People, you know what I'm saying? I'm just talking story, understanding where we might be in the course of the world right now. We are challenged and invited to stand in the darkness and let the imagination come from there. Anyone else? Yes.
There were 4 people
Yeah.
facing different directions that were looking into the darkness.
Yeah.
So it was like 4 different visions of darkness.
Yes. Yes. And some people would say, and it's from this story that you got the 4 directions. And so, and actually this is, in this case, it's Apache story, like Zuni story, like Navajo story. The 4 directions would be a very big thing. Each direction is a healing direction, and the different forces and energy of creation are seen in those 4 directions. But there's another old story that says there's always 5 directions. There's 4 directions in here. And if you ain't here, you don't have the other 4 directions. And they say that's why you have 5 fingers and 5 toes and 5 senses. 5 includes the here, the spirit of place. If you don't have spirit of place, you can't have anywhere to go. You don't have 4 directions. So that's a matter of stories, whether you're talking 4 or talking 5. But the suggestion is each person is looking in their own direction. And so it's a suggestion that we each are aligned somehow in a way that when we are conscious of that or just stumble into it, we are on the gradient of our life, which means we could be receiving knowledge directly from some unknown source, from the spirit of place, from the darkness itself, from the depth of our own unconscious. Humans are part of this dramatic story, and it's full of surprising revelations. When the darkness lifts, or even when the darkness is present, if a person is grounded, they can have revealing experiences, epiphanies they used to call them. When you're connected to the spirit of place, you can see with an other set of eyes that see the world differently. That was part of the old idea of stories. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Yes?
Just wanted to acknowledge several things. lot of questions. If I may.
Yeah.
You captivated me with this book. My first time seeing you. You captivated your jazz. Your jazz. You excel like a saxophonist. You're a drummer. You play serious piano. You do. I mean, just you have this harmony that's all about love and knowledge. And you sold 2 books to me. Yeah, the only thing that Jessica was saying about the darkness,
Yeah.
and being present within the darkness and breath and with music and all that, which allows one to breathe and exhale and to experience and move into different elements and parts of it. It just allows us to be. You struck many different things with me, and so I'll just present that to you and let you go.
We'll catch up later. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I don't know how much people online can hear, but our friend was just saying that the story brings rhythm. He called it a saxophone, and yeah, it's jazz. It is jazz. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, and the tradition of story that I've learned is spontaneous. So usually I'm playing a drum, by the way. I usually play djembe. All right. So usually I play djembe, and then what happens is I stumbled into it, and then I found out, oh, that's what griots do in Africa. Oh, that's what the Shanakis do in Ireland. Oh, that's what the shamans do in Siberia. People used to tell stories with drums, and then people are pulled not just into the story, but they're pulled into a trance. It's called light trance. And if you think about it, when you're learning something, even off the computer, if you're getting caught in the flow of knowledge, you're in a trance. And so that's the way stories used to be told. And I tend to do it with my rhythm and speech and my body and so on. So thank you for that acknowledgement. Yeah, we're supposed to be in the song of life. We're not supposed to just be in the struggle over ideologies. Ideologies is what you get when you have no more imagination. Just kidding. But anyway, we're supposed to be here in this world full of imagination, full of transformation. Human beings are supposed to transform radically through the course of life. Anyone else? Yes.
I found myself thinking about how you had to stay out there for a while. They're kind of wondering, like, I'm going to go back empty-handed tomorrow morning. Like, it might take a few nights. They're sitting out there staring into the dark going, something's supposed to happen here, right? You have to wait,
Yeah.
You have to stare into it for a while.
Yeah, it's meditation. And recently I was trying to work on the cosmology between light and dark. It's really a big deal. And one of the reasons, just to say it, racism works is because light and dark are so powerful. And so when someone claims one, it already throws everybody into the other one. And then if they disclaim the other one, then the ones that are left standing claiming light, white, bright seem to be the best ones, when really they only have a piece of the truth, what's called a piece of the truth. And so white, that whole white thing is also a speed thing. Like it should happen now. We want it. Where's the next plan? Where are we going now? And then the darkness becomes meditative. Originally, when people started to tell time, they used the sundial, which is really a shadow, right? It's a stick casting a shadow. So time is a shadow on the world. Just consider that. And then the thing about sundials is they're not effective after sundown, right? So the word hours only referred to certain segments of time during daylight. There was no hours at night because night was a return to the original darkness before creation. And so people used to understand at the end of the day, you let go of the things of the day and you allow the night to come, which brings the dreams as well as the stars, as well as direct knowledge sometimes. And so in the dark times, we're being invited to relearn darkness. and I'm with you. You know, you go out at first and it's like, whoa, am I okay? Is there something scary out here? Well, wait a minute, nothing's happened. So we have to learn how to be there in that place. But yeah, originally time only counted during daytime, and nighttime was eternity. And people understood, because they were living close to the earth, that really the earth was born again the next day. When the light came, it was repeating creation. And so people were in creation and they knew it. I'm not saying that they were all okay. Look what the story says. They got sick and didn't even know what it was. So the trouble's been there all along. But people were closer to eternity. They were closer to the earth. They were closer to the stars. And they were closer to the star of their own destiny. And we now are at a distance from all those things. And it's easy to be uncomfortable in the silence or in the darkness or facing emptiness inside or outside. Thank you. We have a question probably from online. Yes.
From online, yes, just a comment. What struck me was the direct communication to the dissatisfied people to go and find somewhere else to do. And that they did find, even if only for some time, a true dwelling place to be.
So I'm just repeating for those online. Someone saying what struck them was how the first people were unsettled and went wandering in order to find a place, and they found it. And so one of the background ideas for getting together tonight is that spirit of place, and in this case the place is Vashon. And so many people on Vashon, I've been here a long time, and so you hear the stories, and people will say, I don't know what happened. I came to that place and I realized I had to live there. That's what happened to me. I came out long time ago. Someone I barely knew said, why don't you come out and visit us on Vashon? And I'm driving down this winding, dark road that eventually leads down to the beach at the bottom, but I don't even know where I'm going. And halfway down, I said, I gotta live in this place. And 2 months later, I moved here, and I've been here for like 50 years. And so that's called spirit of place. And the old, that which welcomes you, that which compels you, invites you. And the old name for that was genus loci, the genius of the place. Genius doesn't mean high IQ or rare talent. The word genius means the spirit that's already there. That's what the word means. And there's a spirit in place. And so one of the ways to dwell in a place is to feel and learn that connection to the spirit of the place. And that's very similar to being in the dark and getting messages from the place. There's an old native saying, you can't hunt in the tribal land until the land knows you. So, so one of the issues is, for so many of us in modern culture, we have landed in a place that we didn't start from. We're not living in the traditional place where all our ancestors came from. So then, and we have to accept that, and that was beautifully acknowledged at the beginning. So then what do? You figure out how to dwell well in the place that has called you to it, if that makes sense. And then, because we're human and because of human nature, we can have a connection to the spirit of the place, and it can inform us the way it had informed people all the way back at the beginning. I hope that makes sense. I said this is an Apache story, White Mountain Apache. The word Apache comes from the Zuni tribe, and the word is Apache, and it means enemy. The Zunis were calling Apache to this group of people who are now called Apache, but it means enemy. Their own name is Dene. The name for them that they say is Dene, which means the people. And in studying stories all over the world, most people call themselves the people. And so then that creates the problem of how do you get everybody together when they're each saying they are the people, and that's why you have stories, rituals, and you need healing ceremonies, is to get everybody past that point. But I find that so amazing that the name someone else used to call what we would call an indigenous tribe, means enemy. And it's not even their own name for them. And yet now they call themselves by that name. And that just tells you how confusion can develop throughout history, and how the notion that there is only one way to see things is always incorrect. That even, anyway, you get the idea. All right. So we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'm appreciating the questions and the interest in the story. Another one from online.
Identified as part of the larger community that came together around the people in the center who were suffering. By helping suffering people in the community, they were healing themselves.
Okay, this is a person giving where they were in the story. So there's a person saying that they were compelled by the idea that by giving energy to those that needed healing, they got healing. And I'm telling you, it is a form of magic. And we've worked with it for many years. For instance, if someone right now was having trouble, and for some reason I'm thinking of young people, because young people are in big trouble now. Young people are growing up in a world where most people think the world's going to end. Most people think we can't survive. Climate crisis and many other crises. And so young people are growing up in a world that's disappearing in front of them. And that creates a tremendous, deep uncertainty. And then you have a culture that is so uncertain of itself and so divided that it can't bring healing to those young people. And so I think of them all the time. And we work with young people. And so one thing that we've done many, many times, whoever is hurting the most, we bring them to the center and we begin to sing to them. We sing these old songs, not like a top 20 hit, but an old song, because the old songs have sounds in them. They're all mantras, and they have sounds in them that reorganize the brain, and they bring a settling energy. And so imagine a whole room of people singing to you because you're in trouble, and they just sing for a while, and all of a sudden you let go. And you let that come in. The music is coming in the way the song came in from the one who made the earth, is coming from everybody. And everybody's singing, and slowly everybody's breathing together. And now you're getting into a kind of communal meditation that's wrapped in sound. And pretty soon the vibration of that, the resonance of that has changed the person or people you're singing to. And in the meantime, everybody's singing got changed as well. And so the healing spreads throughout everyone. And communal healing is a really old human thing, and something that can be rediscovered, and something that's really not hard to do, and has this rare quality of everybody gets some healing, just like everybody can find a place in the story. We have a few more minutes, I think. Yes?
I read it when you were originally telling the story that not only did they sing to those who were hurting, but also touched.
Yeah.
And I just found myself circling back to that a lot, because it's very intimate and powerful. And I think it suggests more than just speaking to or at somebody, but truly being there and physically sharing the joint meaning of what it is to be a human and live with other humans. You have to touch.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll repeat it for those online. She was struck by the ceremony that's at the end of the story. The story is called How Healing Ceremonies Began. It ends with a healing ceremony. And there's the songs that are in there. There's a telling of a creation story. There's knowledge of medicine that's brought. And then there's touch. And so it is human to touch, to be touched, which is an emotional statement, but also a physical statement. And one of the big things that's happened in the world, and it's really necessary to say it in a land trust building, is people have become separate from the earth. That's the only reason you could exploit the hell out of the earth, is you already decided that it wasn't worth anything. And so, but here's the interesting thing. When you think of directions and kinds of knowledge, earth is the energy of touch. When someone says, I'll keep in touch, they're saying there's earth and ground between you and me, and we're going to keep it going. Earth is the energy of generosity, because the earth welcomes everybody. Even after you just did the worst thing you've ever done, the earth doesn't reject your foot. The next step you take, the earth welcomes and it confirms and it accepts and it keeps everyone in touch. As a matter of fact, as we're walking, our feet are all in touch with each other because we're walking on the same ground. And that's called earth energy. And so the story is showing how in touch some of the first people were. They knew that if they stood on the earth in darkness, they didn't know, they intuited something would come. And so I'm with you. So then COVID, which is part of our shared experience now, is making it so people can't touch. It's a very unusual illness. And so then that reminds me of this very old idea that eventually you don't look at what caused the symptom, you look at what the symptom is aimed at. So the symptom, when COVID first started, I thought, oh, this is here to teach us how much we want to be together because we have to be separate. And so the fact that we can't touch reminds us, like you're saying, how much we need touch. And I'll go back to young people. Young people need to be touched emotionally, in other words. And children do too, and I know there's all confusing ideas by that, but the old natural thing was to touch and let each child know that they're loved, that they're seen, that they're felt. And some fear has changed that so that we have children and young people growing up in a world that's falling apart and they haven't been touched enough. They haven't been welcomed enough. Continue talking about earth energy. Talk about it in traditional form. Talk about it in any community, including this one that we live in here. There's not enough welcome. I've worked with traditional people from Africa, and in particular some refugees, and they would welcome each other every 2 hours. And the way they do it is they hold each other, they embrace, which is wonderful, that's natural. You embrace, you touch, and then they play each other's back like a drum while they talk to each other, and they get each other into the rhythm of welcome. And so there's all these things that people used to do that are simple, could be rediscovered and could get us more in touch. And when we're more in touch with each other, we find more in touch with ourselves, which is also happening in the story. And I'll say one more thing about that beautiful moment in the story. The term eventually became laying on of hands. And it's kind of treated like a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's really easy to do. It's really easy to do. You can transmit the care that you have and even a kind of resonance of energy to another person just because you're willing to do that. And so maybe I'm staying with that because I'm really concerned about young people and children who feel they are out of touch, not welcomed. There's not a dwelling place for them because the place that everybody dwells in is being described as something that's not going to exist anymore. And so I tell creation stories more and more often because they're recreation stories and they're the reminder or the invitation to imagine how it starts over and not simply imagine how it ends. So thank you for the touch thing. Where are we in?
We have one last one from the internet. Interesting to think about what a true dwelling place is for various peoples. How or why does the spirit of place attract the whole tribe? Thinking about people that chose such different places, like the Arctic, desert, or gardens.
Okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful idea. Every place is sacred. That was the old idea. And every place has its own genius or its own spirit. And humans are the most adaptable animals or beings on the planet. And so humans wind up living in all the landscapes. And that's an amazing thing. And is kind of the indication of how the spirit of place can attract people to certain areas. Other people wouldn't go there. No thanks. Don't want the cold weather. Don't want the long dark nights in the certain places and all that. And so that, to me, says something about learning who we each are by what we are called towards. The old idea of calling. Everyone is aimed secretly and everyone receives a call. I'm telling you, I arrived on Vashon a long time ago. I haven't even reached the house of these people I hardly knew. And I was saying, I don't know what this is. Years later, I went to Ireland for the first time. My ancestors are Irish on both sides. When I got to the west of Ireland, I realized why the west of Ireland is like Bashan. And I realized, oh, my ancestors live in this kind of environment, and there's some similarity. And so that opened it up for me. And so we're coming to the end, so I just want to say a little bit more about spirit of place. And someone asked early on, well, what is spirit? You know, that people ask that question, especially in the modern world. One way to think about spirit, or one way to consider, is by contrasting spirit with soul. So in ancient peoples all over the earth, tribe of 100 people, I've studied a tribe in down in the Amazon River. They think there's 100 people or so in the tribe. They have a cosmology of the entire universe. They have more than one story of creation. They have endless numbers of imaginations, just 100 and some odd people. Humans are the only mythologists and the only cosmologists. And we are actually here with this capacity to be in the midst of the wonder of the world. And some places give us more wonder than others. And so I felt it when I first arrived here. And then I've found it again and again. I have a great appreciation for Land Trust Project because they've turned the Central Forest and many other places into much more natural forests again, and they put in paths that are synchronized with the forest itself. They're not, so we're invited back into the forest. It's really a great project. And so one of the tricks is to allow the earth, the place, to speak to us. And then the distinction between spirit and soul is spirit in the old cosmologies is connected to fire and air and it's rising. Soul is connected to water and earth and it's descending. And a human being is supposed to grow as high as their spirit will take them while also growing as deep as their soul can go. We are that being. That's what we're here for. That's why the one who made the earth can talk to us. We're supposed to be our imagination connected to creation, connected to the heavens. In the meantime, they used to say, our goat feet walk the earth, but our feelings go deep and go all the way down into the earth. And so spirit is that which rises, but you can't rise in a healthy way on spirit unless you deepen the soul. Spirit heads towards one. They call it spirit. It's already one thing. Soul moves towards diversity and multiplicity, and you need both. And so, typically the stories, the ancient stories, are about both, because you could say the one who made the earth is like the spirit in the story, but the spirit in the story tells them to gather everybody together and do healing, and that's soul work. And so you can find them both that way. And so maybe this is the last thing I want to say. I want to read a little poem. But once we find the spirit of a place, then we're like the first people in the story, and we'll start to notice the trouble in the place. And then the work becomes to develop the soul of the place, because the soul is what allows the spirit to dwell in a place. And so the spirit of the place is the beckoning, sometimes welcoming, often challenging energy that says, make more soul here. And when it comes to the division that was mentioned at the beginning, how the original people, the native people, indigenous people that lived here don't live here anymore, there's healing around that. And there's ways to take the imagination of that and try to keep it present, like mentioning it at the beginning, and imagining that we can heal these old things. There's the oldest Buddhist shrines would have on one part of the shrine the place for the unhealed ancestors. And so every time they were making prayers, they include the prayers for the unhealed ancestors. So that's something that can be done. And when the world gets in as much trouble as it's in now, it's as if things are stirred up. And so you have these old hatreds that come up. I mean, Ukraine is back in World War II somehow. And, but also what comes up is the unhealed stuff. And so the part of us that is connected to those first four people could gain knowledge of how to do some healing of ancestral wounds. And I think that's actually being called for at this time. So I brought one poem. William Stafford, who was one of the great American poets, died 20 some odd years ago. I had the good fortune to work with him and know him. He lived a lot of his life in Oregon. And this is his poem called Spirit of Place, Great Blue Heron. And of course, Great Blue Heron is the main symbol here on Vashon Island. He says this: out of their loneliness for each other, two reeds, or maybe two shadows, lurch forward and become suddenly a life lifted from dawn or the rain. It is the wilderness come back again, a lagoon with our city reflected in its eye. And we have to live, and we live by faith in such presences. It is a test for us, that thin but real undulating figure that promises. And if you keep the faith, I will exist at the edge where your vision joins the sunlight, joins the darkness, joins the rain. And then with our heads in the light and with our feet that go down into the mud where the truth is, we'll continue. Beautiful, huh? Down in the mud where the truth is. If we're going to find the truth, we're going to have to keep going down. And that means also into the darkness that is below, which is all the darkness that's within, which is in modern times called the collective unconscious. And ideas can come from there, the darkness within or the darkness without. So again, thank you for coming out and being interested in strange stuff like mythology, maybe healing, maybe the land, maybe the heritage of humanity. And thank you for joining us online, and be well and find a good place to dwell. Thank you.